Russian President Vladimir Putin says his country will now station tactical nuclear weapons right on NATO's doorstep. Today, Putin announced an agreement with Belarus and says a special storage facility for those weapons will be built there by July. As you can see, Belarus borders both NATO ally Poland and Ukraine. And a former CNN Moscow bureau chief, Jill Doherty, joins us now. She's an adjunct professor at Georgetown University. Jill, I mean, we've heard Vladimir Putin try so many times to be provocative when it comes to injecting the prospect of nuclear weapons into this war in Ukraine. Your reaction to this announcement, is it just more of that bluster? Should it be taken more seriously?
I think what he's trying to do, as usual, is raise the threat level. And as soon as you use the word nuclear, regardless of what kind of nukes he's talking about, it's frightening and it gets attention. And I'm not saying that we should diminish it, Jim, but I think, as usual, with President Putin, you have to read the fine print and put it into context. So what he's saying is, as you said, that we will station these tactical nuclear weapons, field weapons in Belarus. And the question is, when will this happen? Maybe this summer. But I think the important thing is he's not saying, and in fact, he's saying they will not put them in the hands of Alexander Lukashenko, who is the president of Belarus. And that could be a problem. He is keeping control, he says, in the hands of himself, obviously, and Russia in general. So I do think that in all of these things, as soon as you kind of begin upping the ante when you're talking about nuclear weapons, it's provocative, sometimes dangerous, but I do not think that, it's a panic time or anything like that. It's Putin trying to escalate because he has problems.
Right. I mean, we've seen that time and again in Ukraine. And do you think this decision will force any sort of countermove by the U.S. or NATO, or do they just keep an eye on it and see, how much he really does deliver on this?
Well, don't forget that the United States itself has tactical nuclear weapons in Europe. And in fact, Putin mentioned there are 6 bases where they are kept, and that actually apparently is correct, that there are 6 bases where the United States keeps weapons like that. But they are really under control of the U.S. Air Force, and they are on bases. They are not just spread all over the place. So is Putin saying, and very much we've seen this, Jim, in the Ukraine war, you're doing something, it's our turn, we're going to do it. But again, it does up the ante, and if you have more nuclear weapons there, and then also I think it raises a real question of why is Lukashenko even agreeing to this? This is something he gave up, nuclear weapons. Ukraine, Belarus, they all gave them up back in the early 90s. Why does he want any type of nuclear weapon back?
Right. I mean, and Jill, I was just about to ask you that. I mean, Belarus has had no nuclear weapons in its territory since the early 1990s. That in and of itself does present an escalation. I mean, whether you want to call this a Cold War between the U.S. and Russia, I mean, it is, it's provocative.
It's provocative, and it's also, I think, a sign of weakness, weakness by Putin, because one of the only things that he can do right now, let's look at his situation. He did not get a whole lot out of that meeting with the Chinese President Xi. He is now, the ICC has issued a warrant for his arrest as a war criminal. And then also the fighting in Ukraine isn't going very well. So the one thing that Vladimir Putin has all the time in his pocket is his nuclear weapons. So he tends to, resort to bluster about those and threats. And I think that's what we've got here. But every time you do that, it does get more dangerous because there will be, apparently, tactical weapons in Belarus.